Hello, everyone. Let's dive right into the pages of Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And today we start from the chapter Surmises. Though consumed with the hot fire of his purpose, Ahab, in all his thoughts and actions, ever had in view the ultimate capture of Moby Dick. Though he seemed ready to sacrifice all mortal interests to that one passion, nevertheless, it may have been that he was by nature and long habituation far too wedded to a fiery whaleman's ways, altogether to abandon the collateral prosecution of the voyage. Or at least, if this were otherwise, there were not wanting other motives, much more influential with him. It would be refining too much, perhaps, even considering his monomania, to hint that his vindictiveness towards the white whale might have possibly extended itself in some degree to all sperm whales, and that the more monsters he slew by so much, the more he multiplied the chances that each subsequently encountered whale would prove to be the hated one he hunted. But if such an hypothesis be indeed exceptionable, there were still additional considerations which, though not so strictly according with the wildness of his ruling passion, yet were by no means incapable of swaying him. To accomplish his object, Ahab must use tools, and of all tools used in the shadow of the moon, men are most apt to get out of order. He knew, for example, that however magnetic his ascendancy in some respects was over Starbuck, yet that ascendancy did not cover the complete spiritual man, any more than mere corporeal superiority involves intellectual mastership. For to the purely spiritual, the intellectual but stand in a sort of corporeal relation. Starbuck's body and Starbuck's coerced will were Ahab's so long as Ahab kept his magnet at Starbuck's brain. Still, he knew that for all this the chief mate in his soul abhorred his captain's quest, and could he would joyfully disintegrate himself from it, or even frustrate it. It might be that a long interval would elapse ere the white whale was seen. During that long interval, Starbuck would ever be apt to fall into open relapses of rebellion against his captain's leadership, unless some ordinary, prudential, circumstantial influences were brought to bear upon him. Not only that, but the subtle insanity of Ahab respecting Moby Dick was no ways more significantly manifested than in his superlative sense and shrewdness in foreseeing that for the present the hunt should in some way be stripped of that strange imaginative impiousness which naturally invested it, that the full terror of the voyage must be kept withdrawn into the obscure background, for few men's courage is proof against protracted meditation, unrelieved by action, that when they stood their long night watches, his officers and men must have some nearer things to think of than Moby Dick. For however eagerly and impetuously the savage crew had hailed the announcement of his quest, yet all sailors of all sorts are more or less capricious and unreliable. They live in the varying outer weather, and they inhale its fickleness. And when retained for any object remote and blank in the pursuit, however promissory of life and passion in the end, it is above all things requisite and temporary interests and employments should intervene, and hold them healthily suspended for the final dash. Nor was Ahab unmindful of another thing. In times of strong emotion, mankind disdain all base considerations, but such times are evanescent. The permanent constitutional condition of the manufactured man, thought Ahab, is sordidness, granting that the white whale fully incites the hearts of this my savage crew, and playing around their savageness even breeds a certain generous knight-errantism in them. Still, while for the love of it they give chase to Moby Dick, they must also have food for their more common daily appetites. For even the high-lifted and chivalric crusaders of old times were not content to traverse 2,000 miles of land to fight for their holy sepulchre without committing burglaries, picking pockets, and gaining other pious prerequisites. Perquisites, by the way. Had they been strictly held to their one final and romantic object, that final and romantic object too many would have turned from in disgust. I will not strip these men, thought Ahab, of all hopes of cash. Cash. They may scorn cash now, but let some months go by, and no prospective promise of it to them, and then this same quintessent cash, all at once mutinying in them, this same cash would soon cashier Ahab. Nor was there wanting still another precautionary motive more related to Ahab personally. Having impulsively, it is probable, and perhaps somewhat prematurely revealed the prime but private purpose of the Pequod's voyage, Ahab was now entirely conscious that, in doing so, he had indirectly laid himself open to the unanswerable charge of usurpation, and with perfect impunity, both moral and legal, his crew, if so disposed, and to that end competent, could refuse all further obedience to him, and even violently wrest from him the command. From even the barely hinted imputation of usurpation, and the possible consequences of such a surpassed impression gaining ground, Ahab must, of course, have been most anxious to protect himself. That protection could only consist in his own predominating brain and heart and hand, baked by a heedful, closely calculating attention to every minute atmospheric influence which it was possible for his crew to be subjected to. For all these reasons, then, and others perhaps too analytic to be verbally developed here, Ahab plainly saw that he must still, in a good degree, continue true to the natural, nominal purpose of the Pequod's voyage, observe all customary usages, and not only that, but force himself to evince all his well-known passionate interest in the general pursuit of his profession. Be all this as it may, his voice was now often heard hailing the three mastheads and admonishing them to keep a bright lookout, and not omit reporting even a porpoise. This vigilance was not long without reward. The Mapmaker. It was a cloudy, sultry afternoon. The seamen were lazily lounging about the decks, or vacantly gazing over into the lead-colored waters. Quickwig and I were mildly employed weaving what is called a sword mat for an additional lashing to our boat. So still and subdued, and yet somehow preluding, was all the scene, and such an incantation of reverie lurked in the air, that each silent sailor seemed resolved into his own invisible self. I was the attendant or page of Quickwig, while busy at the mat. As I kept passing and repassing the filling or woof of marline between the long yarns of the warp, using my own hand for the shuttle, and as Quickwig, standing sideways ever and anon, slid his heavy oaken sword between the threads, and idly, looking off upon the water, carelessly and unthinkingly drove home every yarn. I say so strange a dreaminess did there then reign all over the ship, and all over the sea, only broken by the intermitting dull sound of the sword, that it seemed as if this were the loom of the time, and I myself were a shuttle, mechanically weaving and weaving away at the fates. There lay the fixed threads of the warp, subject to but one single, ever-returning, unchanging vibration, and that vibration merely enough to admit of the crosswise interblending of other threads with its own. This warp seemed necessity, and here, thought I, with my own hand I ply my own shuttle, and weave my own destiny into these unalterable threads. Meantime, Queequeg's impulsive, indifferent sword, sometimes hitting the woof slantingly or crookedly or strongly or weakly, as the case might be, and by this difference in the concluding blow producing a corresponding contrast in the final aspect of the completed fabric, this savage's sword, thought I, which thus finally shapes and fashions both warp and woof, this easy, indifferent sword must be chance, chance, free will, and necessity, nowise incompatible, all interweavingly working together. The straight warp of necessity, not to be swerved from its ultimate course, its every altering vibration, indeed only tending to that, free will, still free to ply her shuttle between given threads, and chance, though restrained in its play within the right lines of necessity, and sideways in its motion directed by free will, though thus prescribed to by both. Chance by turns rules either, and has the last featuring blow at events. Thus we were weaving and weaving away, when I started at a sound so strange, long-drawn and musically wild and unearthly, that the ball of free will dropped from my hand. And I stood gazing up at the clouds, whence that voice dropped like a wing. High aloft in the cross-trees was that mad gay-header Tastego. His body was reaching eagerly forward, his hand stretched out like a wand, and at brief sudden intervals he continued his cries. To be sure, the same sound was that very moment perhaps being heard all over the seas from hundreds of whalemen's lookouts perched as high in the air. But from few of those lungs could that accustomed old cry have derived such a marvelous cadence as from Tashtego the Indian's. As he stood hovering over you half suspended in air, so wildly and eagerly peering towards the horizon, you would have thought him some prophet or seer beholding the shadows of fate, and by those wild cries announcing their coming. "There she blows! There she blows! She blows!" "Where away?" "On the ice beam about 2 miles off, a school of them." Instantly all was commotion. The sperm whale blows as a clock ticks, with the same undeviating and reliable uniformity, and thereby whalemen distinguish this fish from other tribes of his genus. "There go flukes," was now the cry from Tashtego, and the whales disappeared. "Quick, starward," cried Ahab. Time! Doughboy hurried below, glanced at the watch, and reported the exact minute to Ahab. The ship was now kept away from the wind, and she went gently rolling before it. Tashtego reporting that the whales had gone down heading to leeward, we confidently looked to see them again directly in advance of our bows. For that singular craft at times evinced by the sperm whale, when sounding with his head in one direction, he, nevertheless, while concealed beneath the surface, mills round, and swiftly swims off in the opposite quarter. This deceitfulness in his could not now be in action, for there was no reason to suppose that the fish seen by Tashtego had been in any way alarmed, or indeed knew at all of our vicinity. One of the men selected for ship keepers, that is, those not appointed to the boats, by this time relieved the Indian at the mainmast head. The sailors at the fore and mizzen had come down. The line tubs were fixed in their places. The cranes were thrust out. The main yard was backed, and the 3 boats swung over the sea like 3 samphire baskets over high cliffs. Outside of the bulwarks, their eager crews with one hand clung to the rail, while one foot was expectantly poised on the gunwale. So looked the long line of man-of-war's men, about to throw themselves on board an enemy's ship. But at this crucial instant a sudden exclamation was heard that took every eye from the whale. With a start, all glared at dark Ahab, who was surrounded by 5 dusky phantoms that seemed fresh formed out of air. The first lowering. The phantoms, for so they then seemed, were flitting on the other side of the deck, and with a noiseless celerity were casting loose the tackles and bands of the boat which swung there. This boat had always been deemed one of the spare boats, though technically called the captain's, on account of its hanging from the starboard quarter. The figure that now stood by its bows was tall and swart, with one white tooth evilly protruding from its steel-like lips. A rumpled Chinese jacket of black cotton funerally invested him, with wide black trousers of the same dark stuff. But strangely, crowning this ebonness was a glistening white plaited turban. The living hair braided and coiled round and round upon his head. Less swart in aspect, the companions of this figure were of that vivid tiger-yellow complexion peculiar to some of the aboriginal natives of the Manilas, a race notorious for a certain diabolism of subtlety, and by some honest white mariners supposed to be the paid spies and secret confidential agents on the water of the devil, their lord, whose counting-room they suppose to be elsewhere. While yet the wondering ship's company were gazing upon these strangers, Ahab cried out to the white-turbaned old man at their head, "All ready there, Fedallah?" "Ready," was the half-hissed reply. "Lower away then, d'ye hear?" shouting across the deck. "Lower away there, I say." Such was the thunder of his voice that, spite of their amazement, the men sprang over the rail. The sheaves whirled round in the blocks. With a wallow, the 3 boats dropped into the sea, while, with a dexterous, off-handed daring, unknown in any other vocation, the sailors, goat-like, leaped down the rolling ship's side into the tossed boats below. Hardly had they pulled out from under the ship's lee, when a 4th keel coming from the windward side pulled round under the stern, and showed the 5 strangers rowing Ahab, who, standing erect in the stern, loudly hailed Starbuck, Stubb, and Flask to spread themselves widely, so as to cover a large expanse of water. But with all their eyes again riveted upon the swart Fedallah and his crew, the inmates of the other boats obeyed not the command. "Captain Ahab," said Starbuck. "Spread yourselves," cried Ahab. "Give way, all 4 boats. Thou, Flask, put out more to leeward." "Aye, aye, sir," cheerily cried the king post, sweeping round his great steering oar. "Lay back," addressing his crew. "There, there, there again. There she blows right ahead. Boys, lay back." "Never hid yonder yellow boys, Archie." "Oh, I don't mind 'em, sir," said Archie. "I knew it all before now. Didn't I hear him in the hold? And didn't I tell Cabaco hear of it? What say ye, Cabaco? They are stowaways, Mr. Flask." Pull, pull, my fine hearts alive, pull, my children, pull, my little ones. Drawingly and soothingly sighed Stubb to his crew, some of whom still showed signs of uneasiness. Why don't you break your backbones, my boys? What is it you stare at? Those chaps in yonder boat? They are only 5 more hands come to help us. Never mind from where. The more the merrier. Pull then, do pull. Never mind the brimstone. Devils are good fellows enough. So, there you are now. That's the stroke of 1,000 pounds. That's the stroke to sweep the stakes. Hurrah for the gold cup of sperm oil, my heroes. 3 cheers, men. All hearts alive. Easy, easy. Don't be in a hurry. Don't be in a hurry. Why don't you snap your oars, you rascals? Bite something, you dogs. So, then. Softly, softly. That's it. That's it. Long and strong. Give way there, give way. The devil fetch. Ye ragamuffin rapscallions. Ye are all asleep. Stop snoring, ye sleepers, and pull. Pull, will ye? Pull, can't ye? Pull. Won't ye? Why, in the name of gudgeons and ginger cakes, don't ye pull? Pull and break something. Pull! And start your eyes out. Here. Whipping out the sharp knife from his girdle. Every mother's son of ye draw his knife and pull with the blade between his teeth. That's it, that's it. Now ye do something that looks like it, my steel bits. Start her, my silver spoons. Start her merling spikes. Stubb's exordium to his crew is given here at large, because he had rather a peculiar way of talking to them in general, and especially in inculcating their religion of rowing. But you must not suppose from this specimen of his sermonizings that he ever flew into downright passions with his congregation. Not at all. And therein consisted his chief peculiarity. He would say the most terrific things to his crew, in a tone so strangely compounded of fun and fury, and the fury seemed so calculated merely as a spice to the fun, and no oarsman could hear such queer invocations without pulling for dear life, and yet pulling for the mere joke of the thing. Besides, he all the time looked so easy and indolent himself, so longingly managed his steering oar, and so broadly gaped, open-mouthed at times, that the mere sight of such a yawning commander, by sheer force of contrast, acted like a charm upon the crew. Then again, Stubb was one of those odd sort of humorists, whose jollity is sometimes so curiously ambiguous as to put all inferiors on their guard in the matter of obeying them. In obedience to a sign from Ahab, Starbuck was now pulling obliquely across Stubb's bow, and when for a minute or so the 2 boats were pretty near to each other, Stubb hailed the mate. "Mr. Starbuck, larboard boat there, ahoy! A word with ye, sir, if ye please." "Halloa!" returned Starbuck, turning round not a single inch as he spoke, still earnestly but whisperingly urging his crew, his face set like a flint from Stubb's. "What think ye of those yellow boys, sir?" "Smuggled on board, somehow, before the ship sailed. Strong boys," in a whisper to his crew, then speaking out loud again. "A sad business, Mr. Stubb. Seethe her, my lads. But never mind, Mr. Stubb, all for the best. Let all your crew pull strong, come what will. Spring, my men, spring! There's hogs heads of sperm ahead. Mr. Stubb, and that's what you came for. Pull, my boys! Sperm's the play." This at least is duty. Duty and profit hand in hand. Aye, I thought as much, soliloquized Stubb when the boats diverged. As soon as I clapped eye on him, I thought so. Aye, and that's what he went into the afterhold for, so often, as Doughboy long suspected. They were hidden down there, the white whales at the bottom of it. Well, so be it. Can't be helped. All right. Give way, men. It ain't the white whale today. Give way. Now the advent of these outlandish strangers at such a critical instant as the lowering of the boats from the deck, this had not unreasonably awakened a sort of superstitious amazement in some of the ship's company. But Archie's fancied discovery having some time previous got abroad among them. Though indeed not credited then, this had in some small measure prepared them for the event. It took off the extreme edge of their wonder, and so, what with all this, and Stubb's confident way of accounting for their appearance, they were for the time freed from superstitious surmisings, though the affair still left abundant room for all manner of wild conjectures as to dark Ahab's precise agency in the matter from the beginning. For me, I silently recalled the mysterious shadows I had seen creeping on board the Pequod during the dim Nantucket dawn, as well as the enigmatical hintings of the unaccountable Elijah. Meantime, Ahab, out of the hearing of his officers, having sighted the furthest to windward, was still ranging ahead of the other boats, a circumstance bespeaking how potent a crew was pulling him. Those tiger-yellow creatures of his seemed all steel and whalebone. Like 5-trip hammers they rose and fell with regular strokes of strength, which periodically started the boat along the water like a horizontal burst boiler out of a Mississippi steamer. As for Fedallah, who was seen pulling the harpooner oar, he had thrown aside his black jacket and displayed his naked chest, with the whole part of his body above the gunwale, clearly cut against the altering depressions of the watery horizon, while at the other end of the boat, Ahab, with one arm, like a fencer's, thrown half backward into the air as if to counterbalance any tendency to trip, Ahab was seen steadily managing his steering oar as in 1,000 boat lowerings ere the white whale had torn him. All at once the outstretched arm gave a peculiar motion, and then remained fixed, while the boat's 5 oars were seen simultaneously peaked. Boat and crew sat motionless on the sea. Instantly the 3 spread boats in the rear paused on their way. The whales had irregularly settled bodily down into the blue, thus giving no distinctly discernible token of the movement, though from his closer vicinity Ahab had observed it. "Every man look out along his oars," cried Starbuck. "Though, quick, stand up." Nimbly springing up from the triangular raised box in the bow, the savage stood erect there, and with intensely eager eyes gazed off towards the spot where the chase had last been descried. Likewise upon the extreme stern of the boat, where it was also triangularly platformed level with the gunwale, Starbuck himself was seen coolly and adroitly balancing himself to the jerking tossings of his chip of a craft, and silently eyeing the vast blue eye of the sea. Not very far distant, Flask's boat was also lying breathlessly still, its commander recklessly standing upon the top of the loggerhead, a stout sort of post rooted in the keel, and rising some 2 feet above the keel of the stern platform. It is used for catching turns with the whale line, Its top is not more spacious than the palm of a man's hand, and standing upon such a base as that, Flask seemed perched at the masthead of some ship which had sunk to all but her trucks. But Little King Post was small and short, and at the same time Little King Post was full of a large and tall ambition, so that this loggerhead standpoint of his did by no means satisfy King Post. "I can't see 3 seas off. Tip us up and over there, and let me on to that." Upon this, Daggoo, with either hand upon the gunwale to steady his way, swiftly slid aft, and then, erecting himself, volunteered his lofty shoulders for a pedestal. "Good a master as any, sir. Will you mount?" "That I will, and thank you very much, my fine fellow. Only I wish you 50 feet taller." Whereupon, planting his feet firmly against 2 opposite planks of the boat, the gigantic negro, stooping a little, presented his flat palm to Flask's foot, and then, putting Flask's hand on his hearse-plumed head, and bidding him spring as he himself should toss, with one dexterous fling landed the little man high and dry on his shoulders. And here was Flask now standing, Daggoo with one lifted arm furnishing him with a breastband to lean against and steady himself by. At any time, it is a strange sight to the tyro to see with what wondrous habitude of unconscious skill the whaleman will maintain an erect posture in his boat, even when pitched about by the most righteously perverse and cross-running seas. Still more strange to see him giddily perched upon the loggerhead itself, under such circumstances. But the sight of little Flask mounted upon gigantic Daggoo was yet more curious, for, sustaining himself with a cool, indifferent, easy, unthought-of barbaric majesty, the noble negro to every roll of the sea harmoniously rolled his fine form. On his broad back, flaxen-haired Flask seemed a snowflake. The bearer looked nobler than the rider, though truly vivacious, tumultuous, ostentatious little Flask would now and then stamp with impatience. But not one added heave did he thereby give to the negro's loud lordly chest. So have I seen passion and vanity stamping the living magnanimous earth, but the earth did not alter her tides and her seasons for that. Meanwhile, Stubb the third mate betrayed no such far-gazing solicitudes. The whale might have made one of their regular surroundings, not a temporary dive from mere fright. And if that were the case, Stubb, as his wont is in such cases, it seems, was resolved to solace the languishing interval with his pipe. He withdrew it from his hatband, where he always wore it aslant like a feather. He loaded it and rammed home the loading with his thumb end, and hardly had he ignited his match across the rough sandpaper of his hand, when Tashtego, his harpooner, whose eyes had been setting to windward like 2 fixed stars, suddenly dropped like light from his erect attitude to his seat, crying out in a quick frenzy of hurry, "Down, down all and give way! There they are!" To a landsman, no whale nor any sign of herring would have been visible at that moment. Nothing but a troubled bit of greenish white water, and thin scattered puffs of vapor hovering over it, and suffusingly blowing off to leeward, like the confused scud from white rolling billows. The air around suddenly vibrated and tingled, as it were like the air over intensely heated plates of iron. Beneath this atmospheric waving and curling and partially beneath a thin layer of water. Also, the whales were swimming. Seen in advance of all the other indications and puffs of vapor they spouted, seemed their forerunning couriers and detached flying outriders. All 4 boats were now in keen pursuit of that one spot of troubled water and air, but it bade far to outstrip them. It flew on, as a mass of interblending bubbles borne down a rapid stream from the hills. "Pull, pull, my good boys," said Starbuck in the lowest possible but intensest concentrated whisper to his men, while the sharp fixed glance from his eyes darted straight ahead of the bow, almost seemed as 2 visible needles in 2 unerring binnacle compasses. He did not say much to his crew, though, nor did his crew say anything to him. Only the silence of the boat was at intervals startlingly pierced by one of his peculiar whispers, now harsh with command, now soft with entreaty. How different the loud little king-post! "Sing out and say something, my hearties! Roar and pull, my thunderbolts! Beach me on their black backs, boys! Only do that for me, and I'll sign over you my Martha's Vineyards plantation, boys, including wife and children, boys! Lay me on, oh Lord, Lord, but I shall go stark, staring mad. See that white water?" And so shouting, he pulled his hat from his head and stamped up and down on it. Then, picking it up, flirted it far off upon the sea, and finally fell to rearing and plunging in the boat's stern like a crazed colt from the prairie. "Look at that chap now," philosophically drawled Stubb, who, with his unlighted short pipe, mechanically retained between his teeth, at a short distance, followed after. "He's got fits, that Flask has." "Fits?" "Yes, give him fits, that's the very word. Pitch fits into him. Merrily, merrily, hearts alive. Pudding for supper, you know. Merry's the word. Pull, babes, pull. Sucklings, pull all. But what the devil are you hurrying about? Softly, softly and steadily, my men. Only pull and keep pulling, nothing more. Crack all your backbones and bite your knives in two. That's all. Take it easy. Why don't you take it easy, I say, and burst all your livers and lungs?" But what it was that instructable Ahab said to that tiger yellow crew of his, these were words best omitted here, for you live under that blessed light of the evangelical land. Only the infidel sharks in the audacious seas may give ear to such words, when, with tornado brow and eyes of real murder and foam-glued lips, Ahab leaped after his prey. Meanwhile, all the boats tore on. The repeated specific allusions of Flask to "that whale," as he called the fictitious monster which he declared to be incessantly tantalizing his boat's bow with its tail. These allusions of his were at times so vivid and lifelike that they would cause someone or two of his men to snatch a fearful look over the shoulder. But this was against all rule, for the oarsmen must pull out their eyes and ram a skewer through their necks, usage pronouncing that they must have no organs but ears, and no limbs but arms, in these critical moments. It was a sight full of quick wonder and awe. The vast swells of the omnipotent sea, the surging hollow roar they made as they rolled along the 8 gunwales, like gigantic bowls in a boundless bowling green. The brief suspended agony of the boat, as it would tip for an instant on the knife-like edge of the sharper waves that almost seemed threatening to cut it in two. The sudden, profound dip into the watery glens and hollows, the keen spurrings and goadings to gain the top of the opposite hill, the headlong sled-like slide down its other side. All these with the cries of the herdsmen and harpooneers, and the shuddering gasps of the oarsmen, with the wondrous sight of the ivory Pequod bearing down upon her boats with outstretched sails like a wild hen after her screaming brood. All this was thrilling, not the raw recruit marching from the bosom of his wife into the fever heat of his first battle, not the dead man's ghost encountering the first unknown phantom in the other world. Neither of these can feel stranger and stronger emotions than that man does, who for the first time finds himself pulling into the churned circle of the hunted sperm whale. The dancing white water made by the chase was now becoming more and more visible, owing to the increasing darkness of the dun cloud shadows flung upon the sea. The jets of vapor no longer blended, but tilted everywhere to right and left. The whales seemed separating their wakes. The boats were pulled more apart, Starbuck giving chase to 3 whales running dead to leeward. Our sail was now set, and with the still rising wind we rushed along, the boat going with such madness through the water that the lee oars could scarcely be worked rapidly enough to escape being torn from the rowlocks. Soon we were running through a suffusing white evil of mist, neither ship nor boat to be seen. "Give way, men," whispered Starbuck, drawing still further aft the sheet of his sail. "There is time to kill a fish yet, before the squall comes. There's white water again, close to. Spring!" Soon after, 2 cries in quick succession on each side of us denoted that the other boats had got fast, but hardly were they overheard, when, with a lightning-like hurtling whisper, Starbuck said, "Stand up!" And Quick-Wig, harpoon in hand, sprang to his feet. Though not one of the oarsmen was then facing the life and death peril so close to them ahead, yet, with their eyes on the intense countenance of the mate in the stern of the boat, they knew that the imminent instant had come. They heard, too, an enormous wallowing sound as of 50 elephants stirring in their litter. Meanwhile the boat was still booming through the mist, the waves curling and hissing around us like the erected crests of enraged serpents. "That's his hum! There! Give it to him!" whispered Starbuck. A short rushing sound leaped out of the boat. It was the darted iron of Quick-Wig. Then, all in one welded commotion, came an invisible push from astern, while forward the boat seemed striking on a ledge. The sail collapsed and exploded. A gush of scalding vapor shot up nearby. Something rolled and tumbled like an earthquake beneath us. The whole crew were half suffocated as they were tossed helter-skelter into the white, curdling cream of the squall. Squall, whale, and harpoon had all blended together, and the whale, merely grazed by the iron, escaped. Though completely swamped, the boat was nearly unharmed. Swimming around it, we picked up the floating oars, and, lashing them across the gunwale, tumbled back to our places. There we sat up to our knees in the sea, the water covering every rib and plank, so that to our downward-gazing eyes the suspended craft seemed a coral boat grown up to us from the bottom of the ocean. The wind increased to a howl. The waves dashed their bucklers together. The whole squall roared, forked, and crackled around us like a white fire upon the prairie, in which, unconsumed, we were burning, immortal in these jaws of death. In vain we hailed the other boats, as well roared to the live coals down the chimney of a flaming furnace as hailed those boats in that storm. Meanwhile the driving scud, rack, and mist grew darker with the shadows of night. No sign of the ship could be seen. The rising sea forbade all attempts to bail out the boat. The oars were useless as propellers, performing now the office of life preservers. So cutting the lashing of the waterproof match keg, after many failures Starbuck contrived to ignite the lamp in the lantern. Then stretching it on a wave pole, handed it to Quickwig as the standard bearer of this forlorn hope. There then he sat, holding up that imbecile candle in the heart of that almighty forlornness. There then he sat, the sign and symbol of a man without faith, hopelessly holding up hope in the midst of despair. Wet, drenched through, and shivering cold, despairing of ship or boat, we lifted up our eyes as the dawn came on. The mist still spread over the sea. The empty lantern lay crushed in the bottom of the boat. Suddenly, Quickwig started to his feet, hollowing his hand to his ear. We all heard a faint creaking, as of ropes and yards hitherto muffled by the storm. The sound came nearer and nearer. The thick mists were dimly parted by a huge vague form. Affrighted, we all sprang into the sea as the ship at last loomed into view, bearing right down upon us, within a distance of not much more than its length. Floating on the waves we saw the abandoned boat, as for one instant it tossed and gaped beneath the ship's bows like a chip at the base of a cataract. And then the vast hull rolled over it, and it was seen no more, till it came up weltering astern. Again we swam for it, were dashed against it by the seas, and were at last taken up and safely landed on board. Ere the squall came close to, the other boats had cut loose from their fish and returned to the ship in good time. The ship had given us up, but was still cruising, if haply it might light upon some token of our perishing, an oar or a lance pole. Thank you guys so much for listening in. This was probably the most interesting part of the book so far, and probably the most energetic and most happening, and I enjoyed this, and I hope you did too. But anyways, hadi bra,